Hi, this is Beth from Around the Table Yarns, and today is the third part of our sweater club. We're doing the Quintessential Cardigan from Churchmouse Yarns, and today we're going to work on the buttonhole band, and I'm going to go a little bit off of their script because I'm not sure that I would do the buttonhole band figuring the way that they did it. So the pattern suggests that to do the buttonhole band, to figure out where you're going to put your buttonholes, that you should measure and then divide your measurement. And they say place the markers equally spaced between the first and the imaginary marker. And that's their instructions, which is perfectly valid instructions, but it means you might be eyeballing something or trying to do math, and I want to give you some pointers for how to do it with maybe better math or more straightforward math. So I'm going to switch to my video camera. I'm going to put, and I started to write on here, and then I was like, no, that's not what I want to do. So I just want to start with a drawing of a buttonhole band, for example. So this buttonhole band has one here and one here and 1, 2, 3 buttons in between. Okay, this is not exactly what the setup is for their buttonhole, but theirs is a paid pattern, and we don't share paid pattern information on our videos. So what I want to point out here is that the total number of rows in the buttonhole band is from the beginning to the end. So you need to know the total number of rows. And the way to figure that is to use the button band that you've already made and count the rows in your button band. Now, my button band happens to be in black, and it's really hard to see. I'm going to turn the light up a little bit on it. See if I can bring it over closer so you can see it a little bit better when the light is on it. But I did count, and I just counted each stitch going up, and here's 50, and here's 100, and it turns out that I had 146 rows on my button band. Okay, so you could use markers to keep track. I used a point of a needle, and I just went under each little rib as I went up, and it's very hard to see it in mine, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And every time I got tired, I put a marker in so that I didn't have to keep recounting the same thing. And I just pinned a marker under whatever. So you could do it every 10 rows or every 20 rows or every 50 rows or whatever seems reasonable to you. But that's how I would count up the size. And we stopped with our last row on a holder. So you can see, well, you can't see anything. It just looks black. Okay. So the pattern will have 8 more rows at the top. So wherever your holder is, there will be 8 more rows at the top of that. So like I said, I counted from here to here, and I had 146. So you're going to, the total number of rows will be your 146 or your number plus 8 more. And that comes out to 154, God willing. Okay. Now, the total number of buttons is different in my diagram. Excuse me for 1 second. Sure. So the total number of buttons in my example here is 5.
Okay.
And it's going to take 2 rows to do our buttonhole.
Okay.
So 5 times, so 2 rows, each time it's 2 rows. So 5 times 2 equals 10. So we can figure out how many rows we're going to need for our buttonholes. And then the other thing that I like to do is I like to call the space between the buttons, the buttonhole rows. I'm going to just call that by the letter A.
Okay.
Okay, so the buttonhole could be the B. So B equals 2, and there's 10, and there's 5 of them, so we have 10 rows total. And A, we don't know what it is, but this space up here is half of A, and this space down here is half of A.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Well, I thought you knew the space at the top already is 8.
Well, I know that that's what I know that they want us to put 8 rows up there.
Okay. Okay.
So in my example, the spacing has to do with putting buttons equidistant apart.
I see.
And usually you space the bottom and the top one half of that distance
In the middle. Okay.
of from the beginning or the end of the piece. Does that make sense? Now you could decide to do less than that, but this is an easy way to figure it out. So that means that you have 1 A, 2, 3, 4, 5 A's.
5 A's. Okay.
Right? So if your total number of rows is 154, and 10 of those will be used for the buttonhole, the difference between that is 144.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. So you had 154 total rows, and you had 10 B rows, right?
So so the number of B's is the number of buttons.
Times 2. Well,
times 2.
Times 2. Okay.
So that'll be different in the pattern.
I see.
It's the B rows. So the A, how many A rows there are, the total number of A rows is 144. And the total number of A's is 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half, 5. So we're going to divide 144.
Okay. Hang on one second. I gotta go on mute. Okay. I get it.
Okay. So this is very bright now. Ugh. I thought I had a calculator. I don't have my actual calculator sitting here. So, and I don't know where my phone went. You'd think I'd always have it with me. Okay, so here's my calculator. 144 divided by 5 equals 28.8. So it goes in here 28 times with what remaining? With 8 remaining, so 8 remainder. So we could space these apart 28 rows apart. And we could put these 14 rows from the ends. But we'd be missing 8 rows. We need to do this in even numbers because the buttonhole is worked back and forth. So that's a pair of rows. You can't just do them on odd numbers. So we can't add 1 or 3. We have to add 2 or 4. And I don't necessarily want to add anything here because 14 already seems like that's far enough. But I could add 1, 2, 3, 4. I could add 2 to each of these equally. And that would make them evenly spaced. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes
Okay.
sense.
So then it would actually be 30. So
30.
then I know I'm going to do my buttonhole on rows 15 and 16.
Okay.
And then there'll be 30 more rows. So on row 47
Mm-hmm. 48.
and 48 and so
Okay.
on. And you can, and then that way you don't have to refer to the other piece as you're knitting. You can just figure out what rows you're going to place your buttonhole on and keep track of those rows.
That will be much easier.
Okay. So that is my suggestion, but the other way that they're suggesting doing it is valuable and viable, but it means that you would potentially take a ruler or a tape measure and measure across your whole piece. And then with pins, like try and find out equidistant and not count the rows. So if you're unable to count the rows, you could do this with measurements. And I would recommend if you do that you use centimeters because they're much easier to calculate. So flip your
Yes.
measuring tape over to the centimeter side. So if this is, 106 centimeters, you would just do, instead of doing it with rows, you would do it with centimeters.
Thank you. That's actually what I ended up doing. First, I eyeballed it and I tried counting the rows in between and trying to make sure they were an even number. But then I couldn't figure the top and bottom one in all of that to make it even. And really, it makes sense to leave the half A, which is what I didn't know. So that's very helpful.
So the only trick with that is that half A is including the 8 rows.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So I'd gotten to 146, but there are going to be 8 more rows. So if your half A is more than 8, then the last buttonhole happens not in that spot.
Right, right. And I kind of added it on. I figured out how many I looked ahead, how many rows is the band going to be? I added it on and then kind of said, okay, well, my 8 rows is like half an inch or how many millimeters. And I added that, but it was getting very confusing. So this is very helpful.
So it won't be that many rows in the pattern because they have more buttonholes.
Thank you. That's helpful also.
So 14 rows for half A is bigger because there's fewer buttonholes in my example.
Okay, okay. So it'll be a different amount of rows when I do the pattern. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Great.
All right. Now, the other thing that they tell us is how to do a buttonhole. And I just want to show how they did the buttonhole. I want to show a demonstration of how to do it. And then also I want to give you an option if you do the buttonholes as they've done them. They turn out like this, and they look like a vertical buttonhole between the ribs.
Okay.
But it's only 1 stitch. So they do a SSK and then a yarn over, and that's what makes this buttonhole. So
Okay.
if you prefer a bigger button, like if you have some special buttons that you already know that you want to use and you want to make a bigger button, I would
Mm,
like to show you an alternative buttonhole that makes a horizontal buttonhole
Okay.
and can be altered from one stitch, involving just one stitch, to involving 2 stitches or 3 stitches.
Okay.
So I just want you to have an option if you choose to use it. So the way
Okay.
that the buttonhole, the button band and the buttonhole band is done is with slip stitches, and the stitches are slipped on the wrong side. So I'm on a right side row, and it's just a knit, purl, repeat to the marker.
Excuse me, this is the direction, so you're showing me
This
the
is
vertical.
how the button band and the buttonhole band are worked. They're just a plain
Okay.
rib on the right side,
Okay.
and then they are a slipped rib on the wrong side. So I'm just starting with a demonstration because we need to remember that. So I've got 2 stitches signifying the body of the sweater on the far side of my marker here. So those are always knit or always purled.
Okay.
So here's my coming to the wrong side. So I'll be coming along the body of my sweater till I get
Okay.
to the marker. And then in the directions, it says with the yarn in back. So I move the yarn to the back, slip the stitch, and then you repeat. So it's a slipped rib
Okay.
across all of those stitches. So this is how we've been doing our button
Yeah.
band, and this is how we're doing our buttonhole band. So all of the intervening rows are done in the same way.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So their buttonhole looks like this. You knit, purl, knit, purl, and then there's an SSK. So we do our favorite SSK where we go in knitwise, put the left needle into the stitch
Okay.
to the front of the stitch and the right needle into the back of the next stitch and work them together.
Okay.
So that is an SSK. And
Okay.
then we're going to do a yarn over. So we bring the yarn forward between the needles and lay it over the top of the right needle.
A
And then
yarn over with yarn in front.
the yarn over is you've just knitted a stitch.
Mm-hmm.
So the yarn is in back. To complete the yarn over, you bring the yarn over forward, lay the yarn over the top of the right needle, and then continue knitting a stitch. So the yarn that we laid over the needle stays there as a new stitch. And then we purl a stitch. And that's the end of their buttonhole row. And then when you come back on the wrong side, sorry, my marker's stuck in there. When you come back on the wrong side, I'm going to work to my marker, just like you would work to the marker of your thing. And you're doing that slip stitch rib. So my yarn's in back, I slip that stitch purlwise, I purl a stitch, and then the yarn over gets purled. So I would go ahead and purl it so it's twisted.
Mm-hmm.
And then you purl the last stitch, and then you resume the slip stitch. So on that row, that one purl stitch isn't slipped, it's worked.
Okay.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's how they're doing their buttonhole. And again, it's creating a fairly small buttonhole. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's my pointer finger. It's barely getting through.
Okay.
So it would be suitable for a small button. You could
Okay.
probably force it bigger if you wanted to, but it's not a very big buttonhole. It does sit nicely between the ribs. So I don't think there's anything wrong with how it looks in terms of being between the ribs, but I do
Okay.
think it's a little bit limited in size. So another option for a buttonhole would be to knit, purl, knit. So if you wanted it to be a little bit bigger,
Mm-hmm.
and into this stitch, sorry, you're going to knit, purl, and into the third stitch, you're going to knit into the front and the back.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that creates a new stitch.
Right.
Then you're going to purl the next stitch, and you're going to pull the new stitch that we created over.
Okay.
And that makes
So that,
a nice right angle to the beginning of your buttonhole.
okay.
So we have
Would
not lost a stitch yet.
Can you call that a bind off when you pull it over?
Yes, I'm pulling it over as in a bind off,
As a bind off. Okay.
as to bind off, but I created that stitch and I'm getting rid of it, so I still
Right.
haven't lost any stitches.
Correct.
So now if I knit one more and bind that off, I've now bound off one stitch. I've lost a stitch in the middle now.
Okay.
Does
So
that make sense?
so you knit one more and then you,
And bind it off.
okay.
So that's the only stitch we're actually losing in this.
Okay. One lost it, one decrease.
One decrease. And then I'm going to put this stitch back onto the left needle.
Okay.
And I'm going to bring the yarn, sorry, before I do that, I need to bring the yarn forward,
Okay.
slip the stitch back to the left needle because you're going to purl that together with the next stitch in the ribbing.
Okay.
So
So
I've slipped the stitch. It was here. I'm putting it
okay.
back onto the left needle with the yarn in front. The yarn has
Okay.
to come into the front before you move it. So that
Okay.
it's
And
in
then you
between the
purl both.
stitches. And then I'm going to purl those two together.
Purl two together. Okay.
And then I
Got it.
resume the pattern
Which
to the
is
end of the row,
knit,
which is the
purl,
rib.
knit, purl. Okay.
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 So
Yeah.
when I
that's
come,
the
so
right
there is
step.
a second row to this buttonhole.
Okay.
So when you come to the next row,
Okay. Purl.
you will slip the rib as normal. So you slip the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches, slip the knit stitch, and then you're going to do a backwards loop cast on. So you're going to put, it's easier for me to do it with my left thumb, but I'm going to put a loop on my thumb and put it onto the needle, onto the right needle.
So a backwards loop cast on.
And what makes it a backwards loop is the working yarn is trapped between the old stitch and the new stitch.
Okay.
Okay. If I just wrap that around the needle like that, it's just a yarn over. So I actually want it to be a loop that, like a half hitch, that's holding the stitch onto the needle.
Okay.
And then you're going to go back to your purl and your slip stitch for the knit and the last purl. So I'm still missing a stitch.
Yeah.
Okay. However, we're going to use that yarn over to make the stitch we're missing. So
in the okay.
So
in the next
third row.
Okay.
When I get, so I've worked 3, there's my yarn over, right?
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
going to purl into that yarn over. So I'm going to purl into the front leg, the twisted leg of that yarn over.
Yeah.
I'm going to, see how big it gets? This
Oh,
is why
yeah.
you don't need 2 yarn overs. I'm going to pick it up and knit into the back leg of that. So I'm going to move my yarn to the back and knit into the back leg of that.
Okay.
And then here's my purl stitch that was slipped in the row before. I'm just going to go
Yeah.
ahead and purl that. So I'm making a stitch in that yarn over.
Okay.
And now I have resumed the correct number of stitches. So the first row or the third row of the buttonhole is where you get back to the correct number of stitches. That makes a
Okay.
larger, more horizontal buttonhole. So if you find, so what I
Yeah.
suggest is that you try on a swatch, you could try on a swatch this buttonhole, the 2 buttonholes, and see if you like the size of it.
Okay. I'll get, but well, I might have found buttons. So
If you, yeah, especially if you have buttons in mind
yeah.
that you want to use,
Yeah.
it can make a big difference if you have a large enough buttonhole. So this
Okay.
buttonhole looks a little bit different. It's not, again, it's not vertical the way that the
Yeah.
one they're writing is. And if this one suits you, do it. But if you want a
Okay.
slightly bigger one, you have the option.
Okay.
Okay, so was pretty speedy, which is good because then you can go back to dinner.
Well, thank you.
The homework for next week is
Oh, okay.
to or not next week, for next month. So you have,
Yes.
we have a month to get to the other side, to get to cross
Okay.
the road, to get home from Mexico.
Yes.
So what we'd like to do in the next session, because you really have the skills you already need to make the sleeves. The sleeves
Hmm.
need increases. You know, you cast on,
Yeah.
do the ribbing, you do increases, you get to the armhole point, and then you do bind offs and decreases, and you shape the top of the sleeve. That's no different from what we did in the fronts and the back. So do the sleeves on your own, but get your 2
Yeah.
fronts and your back ready, and we'll put the shoulders together and pick up the
Okay.
stitches for the neckline next
Okay.
time.
I'm working on the sleeves, and
Okay.
I haven't started the side with the buttonholes, which I'll work on. But I
So
do have a question.
if you have all your pieces done, you'll be in a good place.
What I do have a question about is when we get to the class where we're putting it together with, I forgot what did we use on the other sweater? It was a
Mattress stitch.
mattress stitch.
Mhm.
So the yarn that I'm using is the Ito, is that it?
Mhm.
Ito lace. So
Tweed.
what?
It's tweedy.
Yeah, it's like it's black and brownish. Yeah. But
We should
so
use something else for your sewing.
thank you. That was my question. I wasn't sure. I was like, this is, if I
It's
start
not
to,
it's not super durable. Those kinds of yarns are not super durable
yeah,
for sewing. So the difference between knitting and sewing is when you make a stitch, the yarn that makes the stitch does not have to travel through any other stitches.
right. You've been
You
saying
just
that. Yeah.
and you go on. So
And
when
if,
you sew, all of the yarn gets pulled through
yes,
the stitch and so it wears, and it can wear out the yarn if it's woolen spun, which the Ito yarn is woolen spun.
I think it's cashmere and silk. So is that what it is? No,
It's
what is
just silk.
silk? But all the
Just
fluffy
silk, but it's nubby.
nubby. So all that comes, because I've seen, where I've
Mhm.
unwound some of it to
So
redo it. It's like
it,
half of that's gone.
a fingering weight of a dark yarn in a similar color,
Fingerling
fingering weight
weight, okay,
of a dark yarn
of a dark yarn.
in a color
Okay.
that coordinates with your color
Yeah, it's like black and brown,
should
dark
be
brown.
fine, and something that is plied and not
Oh,
woolen spun.
okay. So
So not
plied.
another tweed. Like we're not going to pick a tweed to do this.
Okay, so I have to, so if I come in,
If you come in, we probably have something in our
you could find
stash.
some. Okay,
that we can have,
fine.
that you can use. The nice thing about doing mattress stitch is it's invisible.
right, yeah, but I don't want it to like, I guess this yarn that I'm using, I mean, when I look at it, it seems to me the the color of the thread, the main thread that's like solid is, I guess it's like a piece of silk thread with the fuzzy around it.
Oh, you've got the silk mohair.
Yes, that's what I have. So
Here's- You could
use it.
actually sew with that. It's quite
Really?
strong, but it will be fuzzy and that won't be fun. So we'll find something
Yeah,
else for you.
because that one silk piece is strong, right?
It is.
But
And the mohair is actually quite strong.
oh, but if I start
Mohair,
pulling, yeah.
mohair is the nylon. That's the natural nylon, they say.
Oh, okay. So I could use it, but I think all the mohair will come off as I start to pull it through, and I'll be
Well,
left
but
with the,
it's not easy to sew with that. I mean, if you
okay,
wanted to do some like decorative stitching with mohair,
yeah.
that's fine. But
Okay.
mohair itself is not ideal for.
Okay, that was the word I couldn't. I don't have it with me
That's
because I
okay.
didn't bring it yet, so I couldn't remember mohair. Okay,
Well, I'm so glad you joined and thank you. And
yeah.
this will go up on the website shortly and on YouTube, and I will put a written description in of what the steps are for the alternate buttonhole.
Oh, that would be great. But this will help me so I can get when as soon as I come back, I don't have to watch and I can just start. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Stay
Bye-bye.
warm.
You too. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.